Here we go. Okay, ready, get set, go.
Yes.
Again, it's really hard for me to like focus in on like the harder stuff when it's so nice to see you all. It's really a big simcha. You're all missed, both alumni and alumni. I guess I should say recent alumni and less recent alumni. Some quite less recent alumni, but whatever. Okay, but you're all welcome. We're happy to see you all. The period of time that we find ourselves in right now, I have until when? When am I supposed to go to, Mrs. Levy? What's this? Until 8:45? 8:40? You have to unmute.
I said it's on the hour. So Rabbi Turner is going to start at 9. So I think people want to have a 10-minute break. So in
Got it.
between.
Okay, and the one they'll probably in case want to ask questions and schmooze with one another also. Okay, so I'll try to I don't want to go too long, but we'll try to maybe go for like a half hour or something. Anyway, the time that we find ourselves in now is called the time Bein HaMitzarim. It's based on a pasuk in Eicha, and the Bein HaMitzarim is between the narrows, between the sorrows, is referring to the fact that we had a fast day just last week on Thursday, commemorating the really, I mean, we focus on the fact that the tablets were broken, but basically that's the day on which Klal Yisrael worshipped the golden calf, and that resulted in the breaking of the luchos. But there are a number of other events that happened on that day. The Mishnah in Tainus lists 5 things that happened. All of them have a certain thematic consistency to them. That's maybe something maybe we can talk about a little bit later on. But in any case, there's a major fast last Thursday, and this is between that fast. We have another big fast coming up, obviously, Tisha B'Av. Thankfully, we have a little bit of time before that shows. But the Chazal refers to this time as Bein HaMitzarim. And the thing that we want to be, as we're trying to sort of, what's the purpose of getting together right now, and what's the purpose of talking about this time is, we want to understand what events lead us to that fast, what they represent in terms of sort of what we're missing in our lives today, and what it is that we maybe should be focusing on to try and repair maybe lacks that brought on that sort of historical failure, and sort of that historical failure which represents certain lacks that we still experience in our lives. So there's a practical side to trying to understand exactly what this time period is that we're involved in. But I think that what I wanted to sort of focus on now is to recognize that when we call this period of time the Bein HaMitzarim, the time between these two sorrows, between these two fasts, we want to realize that it's not just sort of the time in between. It's not like there was an event on the 17th of Tammuz, there's going to be another event on Tisha B'Av, and this is the time in between when we wait until the next one comes along. But really, in a certain sense, this is the time which links what happened on the 17th Tammuz with what happens on the 9th of Av. And we have to really recognize that we're in a certain process of time, which very much echoes for those of you who either remember back to years past or this year, in the same way that we speak about the time intervening between Pesach and Shavuot, and between Shavuos. It's not just a time where we sort of wait between one holiday to the next, but there's very much a process which sort of leads us from that first holiday of Pesach to Shavuos. We talked about the fact that neither one of those Chagim are really Chagim that exist unto themselves, but they really very much are a sort of one extended event, and the time in between is the process that brings us from the beginning of that time to the end, from Pesach until Kol Satzara on Har Sinai. So also, this period of time we find ourselves in now is very much the time that sort of brings us from the 17th of Tammuz to the 9th of Av. And we need to understand sort of what these 2 days are about, what this time that links them about, if we want to get some kind of a sense for what it is that this is the meaning and significance of this time, and what it is that we need to be focusing in on as individuals, sort of, what aspect of our personal life we want to be working on to sort of, in this case, to kind of change the course of things as we move from this one fast day, from essentially one disaster event in history to another disastrous event in history. In order to do that, we really need to understand really the whole idea of the process of time generally. One of the key, really, this is really a fruitful time to just sort of concentrate on the significance of Kedushas Zman, the whole idea of what Kedushas Zman is about, and the idea of Zman having kind of a direction to it. The idea of sort of Zmanim and having these unique times is something which is not just an incidental part of sort of Jewish awareness or Jewish mitzvahs. We have to realize just how central sort of the idea of time and awareness of time and the process of time is to being a Jew. And that really comes alive to us in a certain level when we remember what the sort of how we are born as a nation, meaning as a nation in relation with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, that comes through not just through Yetzias Mitzrayim, but through the when we get introduced to the mitzvahs. The mitzvahs are the thing that sort of structure that relationship. So what was the first mitzvah that the Jewish people were given as a nation? That's an audio daily double, right? What was the first mitzvah? There you go, Rosh Chodesh, right? Rosh Chodesh was the first mitzvah. Interestingly enough, because really, I mean, thematically, or I would have thought that it would have made more sense for the Korban Pesach to really be the beginning of the Jewish people, which was really the Korban through which we really entered into the service of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, but it's not. The first mitzvah is Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh really introduces us to a whole different, a new kind of time, a new relationship with time. We spoke about this probably. We spoke about the fact that there's a big difference between sort of living in what we would call kind of a solar structure of time, which is very much a kind of continuous process of relating time, where we have the seasons that give a little different flavor to what time is about. But really, the sun is just something that always shows up every day. It's always there. Sometimes it's hidden from us, but it's effectively always there. And the process of experiencing time in the context of sort of being measured by the sun is something that has a certain constancy to it. Rosh Chodesh introduces a whole different way of relating to time, a time which is structured around the fact that there's a whole concept of a process where the moon grows, then it shrinks and it disappears, and then it's renewed. The idea that time doesn't just move on continuously, but really there's a sort of it's a what we might call a continuous process of renewal and rebirth. It's which gives a whole different sense to the sort of the rhythm of time. That idea that really there's sort of beginnings and process and ends and rebirths and restarts and renewals and all these other kind of things. That's one aspect to what that kind of time is. But also we have to realize, I mean, on a more basic level, the reason why we begin our first mitzvahs with the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh is because the whole point is we got to get out of Egypt. Egypt's going to take place on Pesach, and we don't know when Pesach is unless we know when Rosh Chodesh is. Rosh Chodesh is sort of begins a countdown, which ultimately will bring us to the 15th of Nisan, which is when Yetzias Mitzrayim is really going to take place. On a more practical level, we can't have the Chag of Pesach without Rosh Chodesh. For that matter, we can't have any of the Chagim without Rosh Chodesh. And Rosh Chodesh, as much as it's introducing us to what we might call that lunar calendar kind of a thing, but it's also introducing us into a relationship with time, which is very much structured by the Chagim. So again, just why is this important? Because this is the birth, the beginning of the Jewish people is to enter into a relationship with time, which is completely different from how we related to time before we really became the Jewish people. And we have to recognize that what does it mean that we enter into a kind of a time which is structured by the Moedim? Well, the word Moed is actually very important to us. Again, once upon a time, when people used to be able to fly in airplanes, the thing that in the Rambam's time was like unimaginable they would exist, but suddenly they came into being and then they seem to have disappeared again, whatever. We hope that they will reappear. There's actually a yeshiva bacher that's trying to buy El Al, but that's a different story. We leave that story for another time. But anyway, if you remember the last time you were on a flight, if you were on an El Al flight, right, you got sort of bored with watching the movies, right? So, and you'll sort of go turn to the big map on the front of your airplane there. So it gives you the flight plan, and it's going to, and you remember, where are you going to? Well, it depends on where you're flying to. You could say London or New York, but on your map, it talks about the Ya'ad, Yud Ayin Dalid. That basically means the goal, like where are you going towards? And that's really the root of the word Moed. Moed means that which you are traveling towards, right? And to say that we enter into this period, and the Jewish people are born and entering into a new structure of time. It's a structure of time which is defined by a process of moving towards a goal. I mean, obviously there are a series of Moadim that break up the year, but there is very much a cycle starting from Pesach, ultimately coming to Sukkot, to Sukkot and Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah, right? We're leading through a structure of Moadim, ultimately leading to Simchas Torah, which are the end of that sort of holiday calendar. And really one of the things that we want to understand is a Jew relates to time as a process of moving towards something. Right, there's a goal. We're always moving towards something. Mrs. Kagan reminded me of a story. There was a certain young lady that we got to know when I don't know if you know this, but Mrs. Kagan used to be. She was the first house mother of Neve Yerushalayim. Right, that's why she's actually in her 80s, but she's very well preserved for her age. No, just joking, whatever. But anyway, when Neve moved onto the campus here in Har Nov, we were the first house parents. So we got to know the first that crop of Neve students, and there was a certain young lady who actually came from what we might call the other side of the tracks of Lakewood. Lakewood may not mean much to those English students that are visiting with us, but to Americans, we know what Lakewood is. Lakewood is like the yeshiva capital of the United States. Is like there's a gigantic, whoppingly big yeshiva there that sort of has defined the development of Torah learning in the United States. And it's a town that has a lot of Orthodox Jews in it, but it also has another side to the tracks where it's got a quite impoverished population as well. Hi, I see Natanya just joined us. Hi, Natanya. Whatever. Anyway, what we actually at Neve, there was a girl who came from the other side of the tracks, and the story was that the Beis Yaakov girls in Lakewood, if they want to go and have a teaching career, they do their sort of their practical training in the public school system in Lakewood. So one of these I don't know if she had pigtails, but anyway, a petite little Beis Yaakov girl found herself in a local high school in Lakewood with quite a rough crowd, and a girl sort of came up to her and said, you know, I'm here for you if you need me. You know, we Jews, we got to stick together, which was quite shocking to our Beis Yaakov student because this was quite what we might call a darker complexioned young woman from the basically from the slums of Lakewood. And she got to know her. It turns out the mother was Jewish, and the story was not a pretty one in terms of what had happened to the mother. But in any case, this young lady was Jewish. She eventually ended up in Neve, married a chassid from Brooklyn. But the thing was, she told us that the blacks in Lakewood always would comment about the Jews. Why are they so busy? They're always in such a hurry. What are these people doing all the time? They seem to have so much to do. But really, that is a kind of a poignant a sort of observation. Jews are always doing something. They're always moving towards something. That's kind of like a national characteristic. We're always trying to do something. We're always moving. But that actually starts at the very heart of what it is to be a Jew, a Torah observant Jew, is that we're moving towards a purpose, and that actually structures time for us. It's not just we're doing something, but there's actually an ultimate purpose towards which we are always moving, and time is structured in that way, and that's what the Moedim are really all about. And what is it? What exactly is that? So what we get a sense for is time is moving. Time is going someplace, right? And if we want to know where it's going and how it's getting there, we just have to look at those chagim. Effectively, we're going from Pesach until Simchas Torah, and when it's sort of Pesach Shavuos. For those of us who are around, remember back to that day. Pesach Shavuos is really sort of one holiday. Pesach itself is sort of on the most essential level, is where I'm trying to move from recognizing Paro as my king, meaning the one who defines my world and my purpose, to transferring that to recognizing that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is my king, that he is the one who defines purpose and values in the world. And sort of, again, this language is a little bit not so alive for us anymore. I mean, in England, you have a king. Well, not really. You've got a queen, but it's still not the same thing. Whatever. Let's just say someone who is a leader who personifies the greatest ideals of our humanity and gives direction to our lives in terms of sort of what our purpose is. We understand that we come on Pesach. We come to recognize that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is that being that sort of defines our ideals. And the process of getting from Pesach to Shavuos is really just clarifying on a deeper level what that ideal really looks like. What is the nature of that service? And ultimately, we come to the point where we're getting the mitzvahs on Shavuos, but also just in general, Shavuos was a time of coming to a profoundly deep understanding of the nature of our reality. And when you see the midrashim that describe the experience of being on Har Sinai, everybody knows the medrash that says it was so overwhelming, actually died and had to be brought back to life. But you just imagine just for a moment, what we were able to, the vision that we had in those moments there. That's really what we might call the first stage of what we're about, which is we want to engage reality on a deeper level. We want to understand it more deeply, right? And not just understanding it generally, because on a theoretical level, but understanding it more deeply ultimately is connected to understanding, what am I doing in the world? Who am I? What is my purpose in life? That's what we call the first stage of the Moedim, and then we move from there into Sukkot and Simchas Torah, which is a time where, okay, now I know what it is. I need to make it a reality in the world. Sukkot is a time when it's the time basically the building of the Beis Hamikdash. The 15th of Tishrei, which is when Sukkot begins, is the day when the Jews began building the Mishkan in the Midbar. But it's Sukkot as a holiday is the holiday of Beis Hamikdash. The idea is that when you build your sukkah in your house, it's a mini sukkah. I'm making a home. I'm making a palace for the king. I'm making a palace for the actualization of those ideals that I'm inspired towards by this recognition of this greatest of beings, what we call our king, ultimately leading to Simchas Torah when it becomes internalized in myself as an individual. It's not just the physical palace, but actually it's who I am as an individual. My body, my being becomes the palace for these ideals, the medium through which these things are actualized. But this is what time means for a Jew. It has moadim. It's moving towards a purpose, which in a certain sense has these two elements to it of understanding the world deeply, the meaning and significance of existence and my own personal life, and then taking that and making it a reality in the world, which means I'm actualizing those ideals which are embodied in a Kadosh Baruch Hu himself. A Kadosh Baruch Hu is the definition of all these ideals, and I want to make them a reality in the world. I want to make the world a place which gives expression to the fact that a Kadosh Baruch Hu is its source, with all those ideals that are represented by it. That whole idea also, if you're looking, if it's a little bit too much, I mean, that's a long year already, starting for that 6 months already. We have a much more compact version of it also, which is Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur Sukkot, which is really, sort of after the transgressions that we're kind of commemorating now in this Bein HaMetzarim period, where we then move into a different relation with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, which is defined by tshuva. We reenact that same sort of Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot. We reenact it through Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur Sukkot. It's exactly the same idea. Rosh Hashanah also. Rosh Hashanah is all about, what are we doing on Rosh Hashanah? What defines Rosh Hashanah? Exactly the same things that we were saying before in terms of Pesach. I'm trying to recognize who is my king, right? Meaning, who defines the ideals that really are who I am and what I'm really all about. What do those ideals look like? And again, they become increasingly clear as they move from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur. Right? Yom Kippur is equivalent to Sukkot in Shavuos in the sense that that's when we got the second set of tablets, right? Which that was the Torah. That was all the clarity of what those ideals really look like, and then the same thing in terms of moving into Sukkot. That's what time is about. Time is understanding more deeply, really deeply, what's life really all about? What's my life really mean? And making it a reality in the world, right? And when we look at that Seder of time, that Seder of time, as you go from Rosh Hashanah to Simchas Torah, ask you, how many days is that? How many days does it take to get from Rosh Hashanah to Simchas Torah? You don't have enough fingers and toes. I'll give you a hint. And you should be wearing shoes anyway, even if the camera doesn't go down, doesn't go down that far, right? How long does it take? So I mean, it's easy to calculate it this way. We know when Sukkot starts when on the 15th, and it's 7 days. 7 days for the 15th, the 21st. 22nd is Simchas Torah, 22nd of Tishrei. So if Simchas Torah is on the 22nd of Tishrei, so how long does it take to get from Rosh Hashanah to the 22nd of Tishrei? Not so hard to figure out, right? On what day is Rosh Hashanah? First day of Tishrei. So it's 22 days, right? It takes 22 days. If you want to know what the significance of those 22 days is, 22 days is the time it takes from the budding of an almond fruit till it ripens into a mature fruit. It's the fastest growing fruit, right? How long? What does it mean to begin something and mature it? What's the shortest version of that? Shkeidia, that idea of sort of running after something. 22 days is what it takes for something to begin until it becomes something which is ripe. But the moedim, the structure of time for us is the recognition of the ideal and its actualization, which is this sort of, for whatever reason, this 22-day period. Well, interestingly enough, when we look at the Bein HaMitzarim, this period of time that we're living through, as we go from Shivas V'Tammuz until Tisha B'Av, that also, interestingly enough, is exactly 22 days. In fact, the Medrash itself explains, if you look in the Sefer Yirmiyahu, he was named after me, whatever. Anyway, but in the Sefer Yirmiyahu, the very, very first nevuah there, which is a nevuah of the Charban, right? I mentioned this in the Ramchal class, whatever you were in. I remember I mentioned every year that first nevuah in Yirmiyahu is a vision of a club for beating something down, which is made specifically out of almond wood. And the Medrash basically makes clear that the idea is that the period of time, the club, if you want to say the beating down of Klal Yisrael, represent the Chorban Abayis is something that, in a certain sense, is a 22-day period. It takes us from Shivasa B'Tammuz, which is on one. I mean, in terms of the Navi in Yirmiyahu, we're talking about Chorban Abayis. Shivasa B'Tammuz is the day when the walls of Yerushalayim were breached, and Tisha B'Av is the day when Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. But the idea that's being brought out over here is that the 22 days, what we call this period of Bein HaMitzarim, which begins and includes the 17th of Tammuz, going straight through to Tisha B'Av, is what we might call an inversion of what time is really supposed to be about. And you see that very clearly if we understand that sort of the first stage of what time is supposed to be for us. The first stage is that crowning of the Malchus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the recognition of it, taking you straight through to Shavuos, which is the giving of the Torah, where those ideals and that depth becomes clear. If that's the first stage, then the 17th of Tammuz was the day when the luchos were broken, right? It was, in a certain sense, it's the breaking and the destruction of Torah. It's if we understand that it's all moving towards Sukkot and Shmini Atzeres, which is really all about building the Mishkan, building the Beis HaMikdash, creating a palace or a home, or actualizing and realizing those ideas in the world, internalizing them into myself. Well, the 9th of Av is the day when Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. We see when we look at this period of time, Bein HaMitzarim, what we're really looking at is it's a creation of a process of time, but it's moving in the wrong direction. It's going the wrong way. In other words, like when we left Mitzrayim, when we came out of Mitzrayim, and when we were born as the Jewish people, we were born into a structure of time that was moving towards purpose, that had a structure to it of achieving vision that was then actualized into reality, making it a reality in the world. And basically what happened with Shivas of Tammuz is we effectively created an alternative vision which really was the equivalent of the destruction of the Torah, meaning a complete misunderstanding of what reality is really all about, what my purpose is all about, which ultimately leads in as inevitably as Rosh Hashanah brings to Simchas Torah, meaning if I truly recognize who and what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is and everything that he represents, if I can truly have clarity on that, that will inevitably lead me to build Beis HaMikdash. Then the vision that we substituted for that when we built the golden calf, which basically translated directly into the destruction of the Torah, that just as inevitably leads to Churban, it leads to destruction. That's really the way that we want to be thinking about this period of time. To a certain extent, what we need to do then, when we have at least a little bit of clarity, on like what was this alternative vision of the Egel. Again, that was a couple of days ago, but it's not gone. The whole point is that when we built that Egel, what was contained within that was a sort of vision of a definition of reality and understanding of reality, which leads to Churban. And again, we went through this into some depth, when you were in Midrash Tehillah. But the bottom line is that the building of the calf was an effort to obscure my clarity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the world, with the intent of being able to live my life without being constantly focused on him. And it's basically what it means is, instead of living my life for a larger purpose, I'm sort of living it for the immediacy of sort of myself. That's really, if you break it down to its most basic level, again, we can talk about the symbolism of an egel, of an ox, as one of the faces of the angels in the Merkava on the left side, representing Midas Hadin and the limitation of a Kadosh Baruch Hu's expression of the world. We did all that in Midrash Tehillah. We don't have time for that now. We're just trying to get to we're really trying to understand what is it all about for us right now. And basically it's, am I living for something larger than myself? Or am I living for myself, right? And again, we have all kinds of ways where one of the main things about the golden calf was how that was, we were able to successfully obscure what our real motivations were. But the whole point was, what Chazal give us the instruments to do is to cut through all those obscuring justifications to understand the real underlying motivation was, I'm not living for something larger than this, I'm just living for myself. And the bottom line is that sort of what we might call sort of a life without a larger purpose ultimately leads to Churban. On a certain level, we understand that leads to Churban because Kadosh Baruch Hu created the world for a purpose, and it can only exist in the context of that purpose. And therefore, if we're not moving in that direction, if that's not our ya'ad, if that's not our goal, then there's not really a reason for the world. And therefore, our world basically gets destroyed. Again, the destruction is not a destruction which is a total destruction or a permanent destruction. It's basically a destruction of a purposeless world that gives us the opportunity to recreate a purposeful world. That actually gets to another point, which is like, why is it Tisha B'Av, which represents the day of complete disaster for us, also the day on which Mashiach is born? Like, how do you put those two things together? And the other thing is to understand that when a country destroys something for the Jewish people, the destruction is never the end. It's just a clearing of the field for a rebirth. Like when we start building in the wrong direction, building in such a way that that building cannot bring us where it is that we ultimately want to go to, until that building collapses, we can't start rebuilding it in a proper way. But the idea of the Churban, which ultimately was the result of the golden calf so long ago in history, and it's not like it's the only time we've had those destructions periodically through history, and they always represent exactly the same thing, which is then when we're building on a false foundation, we're building a building that can't really take us where we ultimately really want to go. It's only with the collapse of that building we have the opportunity to start rebuilding in the proper way. And the idea of saying that the Chazal telling us that Mashiach is born on Tisha B'Av, because ultimately we look at this destruction, as painful as it is, as something which is really a step in a new process. But bottom line is that as we try to understand, we are commemorating a certain period in history. You can, or a certain, what we might call a certain facet of reality, which is kind of anti-purpose. The anti-purpose, which has expressed itself in numerous times in Jewish history. You can go back to the most basic level of the Midbar, where we go back to the most basic, which is in the Midbar, where it was the building of the golden calf, destruction of the luchos, recovery on a certain level, but ultimately leading to Tisha B'Av, where we were excluded from going into Eretz Yisrael. Later times in history, it would be Shivas Ram would be the breaching of the wall, leading to the Chorban Beis Hamikdash. The time that the times we find ourselves in living in right now, which is a time of kind of a ambiguous time where we're blessed with living in Eretz Yisrael. We have a certain amount of material comfort, in the world as the Jewish people. We're established on a certain level. On another level, so much of our focus has nothing to do with our higher purpose. We are still very, very much in Golas for all the the strength that we have in our time. But we go through this periodically, and in certain sense, it's sort of it characterizes the time we're in now. That this is the time to be focusing on recognizing the shortcomings in our vision of what we are all about, and recognizing what that ultimately leads to. Again, in terms of Kadosh Baruch Hu running the world, on a certain level, the gift of destruction, to be able to reorient ourselves. Exactly the same way that we talked about in Rosh Hashanah. In Rosh Hashanah, I stand before Kadosh Baruch Hu and I say, judge me, please. Because if I'm going in the wrong direction, the only thing that really counts is getting there to you. If it means that there's going to be some pain along the way, I accept whatever it is, because I have this larger purpose that really that's more significant than anything else. I'm willing to accept what comes with it, as long to get back on course. Right? In a certain sense, that's our relationship to this period of time. Also, we feel the pain. We recognize what things are moving towards. We're commemorating the fact that Beis Hamikdash is destroyed, and it is still destroyed. We are in Eretz Yisrael, thank God. We have the opportunity to be building in that way, but the reality is Beis Hamikdash is not there, and that is it's not just the absence of a building. It's the absence of a whole structure of purpose and relationship and definition that is very much missing from our lives. We feel that, but we have to understand this is a period of time to be sort of focusing in on the misunderstandings that we have of who we are and what our lives are really all about, in order to sort of reorient them. Always understanding that what really sort of the paradigm for clarity of what defines me is Rosh Hashanah, recognizing what my ideal really is and understanding myself appropriately, moving towards the ability to make a reality out of that, making my world a vessel for the expression of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, and realizing that on a certain level, our ideals are crooked, and that's what's represented by the egel, and that unless we can straighten those out, it inevitably leads me to a world which is built around selfishness, which is a broken world. Again, even without looking, you can take away, step away for a moment from all the hashkafic aspects and just realize, the world that we live in is a pretty broken world, because it's a world that's very much defined around selfishness, and we see how much that world was. I mean, again, maybe Ms. Kagan would like me to be talking about coronavirus and stuff like that. That's not really so much. I'm really sort of looking at things a little bit more timelessly. But the world that we live in is one where it's not. It's a broken world. It's a broken world because people don't really have a clarity of what they're living for. And if we're looking for a focus during this period of time, these are the poles that define this period of time. Shivasa B'Tammuz, which is clarity about, or the lack thereof, of who I am and what my life is really all about, which leads inevitably to building a life which is kind of a broken world. And if I want to interrupt that process, my first obligation is to recover that clarity about who am I really, what am I living for, what defines me as an individual. Yep, so maybe I'll open. Yeah, Ms. Kagan wants to ask a question. You're muted.
Yeah. Hi, Alexandra and Bracha, do you want to ask your question? Unmute yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just wondering if, like, the Beis Hamikdash was built on a faulty foundation, and this whole time period is us, like, effectively using our ability to have tshuva and make things better. Like, why are these considered such sad days? Like, isn't there hope and happiness there?
I mean, because a person who's real, I think, experiences the pain of loss and lack. And it is a time of loss and lack. Yes, we're supposed to have that larger vision. It's like, but it's like sort of like when something painful happens, we want to understand on a larger level. There must be a purpose behind that, and I must need to have this experience in order to get myself back on track. But that doesn't mean that I'm happy about it. I want to experience the pain. I want to experience the loss. The loss is real, and the pain is real. As a Jewish person, I want to have that larger vision that whatever is happening ultimately is leading me someplace and has purpose. That's very, very important. But it doesn't change the fact that you need to be real, right? We want to for the relationship to be real. We need to experience the reality of the pain as much as having sort of kind of a deeper intellectual vision that is that's supposed to be taking me someplace. What our goal is to integrate these larger ideals into a living reality in the world. The only way we can do that is by experiencing the world in a genuine way as a human being, sort of relating to everything that's about. And pain is painful, and we're not trying to pretend that it's not, even though we wanted to experience that pain in the context of a larger vision and understanding that ultimately, if it's there, because it's leading me someplace. Yeah, that makes sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? Put your hand up. Anyone?
This is the more sort of theoretical, abstract version of it. We've got Rabbi Turner and Mrs. Carter coming on to make it sort of a more personal. I'm taking my traditional role at Midrash Tila of giving everybody an opportunity to rest a little bit before the other speakers come on. But I'm trying to paint for you the bigger picture with it to give a little bit more meaning and context to all the other stuff that you're going to be hearing in terms of how it is that we want to understand this period of time that we're in, and hopefully things get a little bit more specific in the other classes. But it's in this context that you want to be understanding these if you want to have the larger sort of abstract vision of sort of what these times mean and how it is that we want to be relating to them. That makes sense?
Rabbi Kagan, thank you for setting the stage for the evening.